The Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee has a draft bill to overhaul FISMA. It's the Federal Information Security Management Act. The committee voted unanimously to advance the bill to the full Senate. Richard Spires is former CIO at the Department of Homeland Security. He's currently principal at Richard A. Spires Consulting. Richard, welcome.
It's good to be here, Mimi.
So what's in this draft bill, and how would it change how federal civilian agencies report cyber attacks?
Well, there's a lot in this draft bill. It's 132 pages long, and I will have to give them a lot of credit. That I think they went through and really identified best practices and how you go about doing cybersecurity, and I think that's a very, very positive thing. As far as specifically regarding the reporting of incidents, they really have, if you will, upped the game. You have to report much more quickly. Sometimes as quickly as 7 days after an incident. And there's reporting both within the administration, but also to Congress itself. And so, the other thing that they did was, most reporting today is based on the fact that there's been exposure of our personally identifiable information, or PII, right? So the credit card issues and those kinds of things in the private sector. Because of what's happened recently with the SolarWinds attack and also these recent ransomware attacks, they really want to expand that, okay, to be major incidents, which could include other things like national security issues, right, that are arisen, or homeland security issues. And so they're really
Richard,
going...
I was actually going to ask you, how do you define major incident? Isn't that up to, whatever you think is major?
Well, it's interesting, the draft legislation, it actually says that the director of OMB or OMB needs to define that, but then it gives about 8 points that need to be included in the definition. So they're pretty prescriptive as what they expect, but it's really anything that a head of the agency believes has a national security implication, a homeland security implication, or an economic security implication. That's the general thrust of where they're headed with this. So that it goes way beyond just this issue of PII.
So what do you think is missing from this draft bill, and what could be added that would benefit agencies?
As I read through the 132 pages, one, I was impressed with all the detail they have about adding in best practices, everything from penetration testing to reporting on incidents, as we were discussing. But I'll have to say, having been a practitioner in government a couple times as a CIO, the issue that I always see with this kind of legislation is many agencies, particularly on the federal civilian side, they're already overwhelmed, right? They already have a lot on their plates. If you're a CISO or a CIO in these agencies, you're trying to do so many things. And I'm a little concerned that just like the FISMA Act of 2002 and then updated in 2014, they're kind of viewed as compliance activities more than as driving real change. And so what I would advocate is not necessarily to get rid of these best practices in the bill, but I always come back to focus on what's most important. And so what I would advocate is that agencies be forced to do real planning around their IT modernization plans, a 5-year view with real detail, but integrated into that is their cybersecurity modernization plan, okay? And it needs to be risk-based. We always talk about doing risk-based assessments because you can't do it all. And I think it would be better if the bill were more oriented that way so that OMB could work with each agency and laying out that kind of modernization plan rather than forcing each agency to try to meet all the requirements, all these best practices out of the gate, which is kind of the way it's written.
Does this bill affect federal contractors, and are they happy with what's in this draft?
I would say that the bill does affect federal contractors to some degree. There's reporting requirements. For instance, if you're a contractor and you're breached and you're working for an agency, and there could be an impact to that agency, you need to immediately report to that agency that you've been breached as a contractor. I would say the requirements in the bill also, a lot of the work that will be done by contractors. And, again, it ups the game. It's good stuff, but I just worried about the implementation of it for agencies that frankly are so overwhelmed right now.
So, Richard, how do you determine success of cybersecurity at the federal agencies?
That's a great question. You know, it's not a simple thing of a couple metrics, right? And one of the good things about the bill is this idea that CISA, which is part of DHS, right, that gets a lot more responsibility, by the way, in this bill for handling and working with agencies across the federal civilian space in particular, but that they would be doing a continual analysis of agencies, okay? They would be monitoring agencies. They would be doing penetration testing. They would be really working to assess how good an agency is in cybersecurity. I think that's a real positive thing if we can get that set up and working well.
And what about that bigger role for CISA? Do you think that's a positive? What kind of...
I think it is overall. I mean, so many agencies, and particularly, let's say, the smaller agencies in the civilian side, they just do not have the wherewithal to do this well. They don't have the talent, they don't have the money. And so CISA is there to provide, if it's really meant for them to provide more support. Like one of the things in the bill is this idea of them standing up a security operations center as a shared service, and piloting that so that smaller agencies, rather than them trying to do it themselves, if they could get CISA to do that for them, I think we've moved the ball forward for many federal agencies.
Well, Richard, thank you so much for joining us and for being on the program.
Well, thank you, Mimi.